My name is Greg Garnache
And where were you born?
in Biddeford, Maine.
And did you grow up there?
Until after my freshman year of high school, and then my father got a job at Raytheon in Massachusetts, and the family moved to Georgetown, Mass, where I graduated from high school. So I played freshman football, freshman basketball. I played football as a sophomore, and actually basketball as well. And then my parents decided that it would be a good idea for me to get a part-time job while I was in school, so I had to stop playing sports.
You mentioned your father worked for Raytheon. What did your mother do?
She was a bookkeeper when I was younger, and then she worked for Hale Hospital in Haverhill until she retired as in admin. You
And what did you do for work before you joined the military?
I didn't do any work other than my part-time job at a supermarket.
What branch did you join?
I joined the Navy.
And were you drafted or did you enlist?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I was going at the time that I got high up on the draft list. I was going to a prep school in Boston, and I thought I was taking enough courses with enough credits to to satisfy the requirements, but I was a half a credit short, and I wound up high up on the draft list. A Navy recruiter called me, and a buddy of mine, as it turned out, was having the same issue, so we joined together under the buddy program, and we were on our way. I think it was around the 4th of July. If you went in on the buddy program, you got to go to boot camp together and be in the same squad. And so we went through boot camp together at Great Lakes in Illinois. Well, there was the military, there was a lot of marching. There was a lot of learning Navy lingo, because there's different names for different things, and learning how to take care of your clothes. There were, contests, running contests and jumping contests, and going through, a space that had gas in it, and you had to wear a gas mask, and there's all that sort of stuff, and then learning all about all the different vessels in the Navy and what have you. I went to yeoman school, and yeoman in the Navy is like a sort of like a ship's secretary, and also on a small submarine like I was on. I also took care of all the personnel records and took care of doing all of the upkeep of if somebody got a promotion, that had to be put in their service record and all that sort of thing. And then beyond the yeoman school, I got recruited for submarine duty, and I went to submarine school as well. That was pretty intense. Here I was, a 19-year-old kid with, no worldly experience whatsoever. And I had to learn a whole bunch of mechanical things and what have you about submarines, and also I had to survive tank training, which basically they have this huge tank full of water, and they've got two pressurized compartments, one at 50 feet and another one at 100. So you start off at 50 feet, and they pressurize the compartment, and then you go through a hatch into the big tank, and then go up wearing a special life jacket called a stanky hood. And it was all because you needed to have that experience and understand what was going to happen if your submarine got hit. and you needed to escape while the submarine was underwater. So that's all about what that was. And probably the scariest thing I ever did, scariest thing I'll ever do. But I did it. I survived it, and I became a submariner. So, well, as long as you keep saying ho ho ho, ho ho ho, all the way up, and letting the air out of your lungs, then you're good. And of course, the life preserver, all right, had a hood that let air out into the hooded compartment so you could breathe it. It was a diesel electric submarine of World War II vintage called the USS Halfbeak, SS 352. That was the hull number. And I reported aboard the evening of Easter in was 1966, and I went down the hatch into what's known as the after battery, which is the sort of the back part of the submarine, but that was also where the crew's mess was, a crew's eating area. I came down the hatch and came down a ladder. All right, I walked backwards down a ladder, and I turned around and I freaked out. I couldn't believe how closed in everything felt. And the very next morning, we shoved off for 2 weeks of submarine school officer training. So we had, I don't know, probably a dozen submarine school officer candidates who learned, how to maneuver a submarine, how to raise and lower the submarine, how to surface, how to submerge, how to, look at things through the periscope, and went through various, drills and what have you. And at the end of that 2 weeks, my claustrophobia had totally disappeared. It just took a while to get used to everything. And of course, everybody else was used to it. So they were giving off the, same old kind of vibes. And that sort of quieted me down right away. And it was a little bit traumatic at the beginning, but after a while, it just got to be no big deal. Well, that was the only submarine that I served on, and I earned my submarine Dolphins. I don't know if you want to see them. I brought them just for the heck of it. It's a little insignia. I don't know if you want to get a close-up of this, but it took me 6 months to earn these, but that was the first thing that I ever accomplished that I felt proud of. And it was, a rigorous 6 months of learning pretty much every single thing about the submarine, that mechanically, all the systems, what to do in various emergencies and what have you. And it was a pretty intense thing. After that, once I got my Dolphins and I had been on the boat for a while, the guy that I worked for immediately, I was like an E3 when I came on board, got to E4, then I got to E5, and my boss was an E6, and he got a call from a friend of his at the Bureau of Personnel saying that he had a nice shore billet for him if he wanted it. And he didn't want it because when he did his shore duty, he was a recruiter. And he loved doing recruiting, and he always got Nashville, Tennessee, like he had done that already twice in his career. But he said, I got this guy who just made E4, and we had just gotten another yeoman recruit, like a guy who was in the reserves, who was an E3, who had also been to yeoman school. So I was expendable, and so he talked them into recommending me for that post. And I wound up getting a billet working on the Submarine Squadron 10 staff, which was on a submarine tender, right, tied up at the State Pier on the New London side of the Thames River. had been on a boat on the Groton side of the river at the submarine base in Submarine Squadron 8. And so Submarine Squadron 10 turned out to be a all-nuclear submarine squadron. The boat that I was on was an old diesel boat, and all the boats that were in Squadron 8 were all old World War II vintage diesel boats, and like I said, they were used primarily for submarine school training for officers and stuff. So I wound up spending my last year and a half mostly on the USS Fulton, tied up in New London, but we would do 2 cruises a year. I'm sorry, we did 1 cruise a year down to the Caribbean. And we would tie up in Puerto Rico, and they would have their winter operations down there, training operations and stuff. It was called Operation Springboard. And so we got to hang out in the Caribbean for like 6 weeks and drink Puerto Rican rum and go to, shows and stuff like that.
What did you do for off-duty recreation?
While I was in the service?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. We we used to go drinking, when we were on Liberty, especially when we, like the Half Beak went on a cruise to the Caribbean when I was on the Half Beak. So we did that. We went to we did a tour of the Bacardi rum factory. We did a rainforest tour. We spent a day at this beautiful beach, body surfing all day. And then, God, I'm trying to think of the name of the town. I'm having drawn a blank here. But there was an old part of the town that we were in. And, it's sort of like going to, I don't know, Plymouth Plantation or something like that. They were very old kind of buildings that were from the very first European settlements and whatever. And so we did that. And, but we, did a lot of, as I recall, did a lot of beer drinking and stuff. That's what sailors do, Just the way things happened on that particular submarine. They made a med tour before I came on board, and one of the things that happened when I was on board was we spent 6 months in the Philadelphia shipyard. So I, if you want to call Pennsylvania a foreign country, I I did that. And while I was there, I had an interesting experience. I actually got to go to an Army-Navy football game because it used to be played at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. And in fact, I got recruited to be a driver for all the bigwigs that came in that went to the naval base and shipyard that was there. And then I drove them over to the game, and I got to for doing that, I got to watch most of the game.
How long were you in the Navy for?
4 years. Well, my dad was in the Navy, during World War II, and 3 of my uncles also served. One of them was a Marine, one of them was in the Air Force, and the other one was in the Army. And then my brother, who was a mechanic, he had graduated from Haverhill Trade School, before there was a Whittier Trade School, as an auto mechanic, and he went into the Army and wound up working in the motor pool in the Army, and he was stationed in South Korea. Okay, when I was discharged, I was an E5. So you go in if you're an enlisted man, you go in as an E1. And so I made E5 before I got out. I mean, I got a good conduct medal, a Vietnam era medal, but no, I didn't, didn't get any awards or anything for bravery or what have you.
Um, After you left, what did you do?
I went to college. I went to school on the GI Bill.
What did you study?
Government.
And what did you do for work afterwards?
A variety of things. I was an entertainer for 4 years. And then when we had our second kid, my wife told me I needed to get a regular job. Eventually, and I was a carpenter for a while. I was a recruiter for a while. But the job that I settled into eventually was selling high-end windows and doors for a living. My experience as a carpenter, my college education, which allowed me to speak to architects in a civilized manner, and just having had all of the experiences that I'd had in life made that profession really easy for me. So I spent 35 years doing that.
Where did you meet your wife?
I met her on a blind date, and this is really interesting. She was from Groton, Connecticut, all right, and she was going to college with one of my best friends, and she came home, or came to where my friend lived for a weekend, and I was home on leave that weekend, and so they thought, oh, hey, maybe you should meet our friend Greg. He actually, was stationed in Groton, and my future wife went, oh, that's horrible. We have a sign in our neighborhood says, dogs and sailors keep off the lawn, So we met, and we enjoyed each other's company, and so I started dating her while she was home for the summer, and then we eventually got married, and part of the courtship was as a result of her living in Groton, and but anyway, that's how that happened.
When did you move to West Newbury?
In 1985, I believe it was.
And do you still live in the same place you moved to when you came here?
Yes, yeah. It's a 300-year-old house. I was on the Bicentennial Committee. I was a member of that, and I was happy. That was an enjoyable experience for me.
Would you recommend anyone else join the Navy or the Armed Forces in general?
Well, it depends on their circumstances. If you're a young person who hasn't decided yet what you want to do, and you either can't afford to go to college or don't see the point in going to college yet until you make up your mind what you want to do, then it's a place where you can learn a skill on somebody else's dime. You can serve your country, which is I think, an honor to do, and meet people from all over the country. That was one of the interesting things about being in the military, is that you meet people from all over the United States. I mean, I still keep in touch with a couple of people, one of whom lives in California, and the other one who lives in the Seattle, Washington area. And I never would have met them had I not met them on that submarine that I served on. And I occasionally, they have reunions, and I occasionally go to a reunion now and again. Here's one that doesn't involve drinking or women or anything. but it's actually one of the coolest experiences that I ever had as a sailor. We were on our way back from Operation Springboard in the Caribbean, and we were off the coast of Florida when this all happened. And I was standing watch up in the bridge or epicell, actually, it's called. It's that part that sticks up from the submarine. And we were on the surface because being in a diesel electric submarine, we had to recharge our batteries. So we were steaming along, and all of a sudden, and it's toward the end of the day, the sun is starting to set, and which is, for me, that was one of my favorite things. I always loved to stand and watch at sundown and watch the sun go down over the ocean. It was just really magical. And so here it is. You've got this golden glow on the water, all right, from the setting sun, and we encountered a gray whale, the largest creature I had ever seen in my life. And we were sort of steaming alongside of it. It was sort of keeping up with us. And then it veered off to starboard, and we talked the officer of the deck, Mr. Wyman, into calling the CO down below and asking if we could follow the whale for a while. Well, the CO thought that was a hoot. So the next thing you know, he comes up to the bridge, and then there must have been 15 or 20 other guys who came up to see it. And we followed this whale for 45 minutes to an hour, all in this very calm sea that was, like I said, golden hued from the setting sun. It was like magic. I still dream of that thing, because and one of the people who I stood watch with is one of the people that I still stay in touch with. This guy, Pete Clement, who lives in the Seattle area. And but anyway, that's probably my favorite memory, other than the night that I got my Dolphins. Once I got qualified, all the older guys on the boat took me out to a bar, dropped the Dolphins in a big quart-sized container of beer, and I had to drink it all down and catch them in my teeth, So, and that was, drinking for your Dolphins, I guess, was a bit of a tradition on that particular submarine. I don't know if it was done on any other submarines, but at least on that one, that was like a rite of passage.